Hello and welcome to the demo video for the dynamic bill of quantity estimator. This one it's a relatively straightforward spreadsheet, but it's a little bit bitty and there's components to it. And I've done it like this on purpose because I wanted to give you guys as the users ultimate control over this. I didn't want it to be something that you kind of had to continue with how it's set out. I want you to be able to override it at various different stages and input your own things and change what you need to so that it's as flexible as possible. However, I also didn't want it to be so flexible that you could change something by mistake and not actually realize that you were, billing below cost or something silly like that. So I wanted to try and keep it as robust as possible and as calculated as possible, but also as flexible as possible. So there are a few little anomalies where you got to copy and paste things, but I'll talk you through how to do it. And if you follow this process, you should be fine. What I would suggest doing is just running a kind of demo version yourself through using the demo data or putting in your own data and just test it first. And I would certainly test it the first few times until you're ready to actually use it properly and you become accustomed to actually, how you need to be using it. But let me try and explain how it all works. If you start on the two the gray and the black tab, these tabs here are, you would essentially set this up beforehand and you would have this set up as a save template with the gray and the black tab set up. I'll show you what they do. And then when you then come to start a project, which I will start from scratch as it were, you then use the red tabs in order from left to right. So the first one is the logo setup. This one's the straightforward, the easiest one. All you do is you follow these instructions, right click, click on this cell, go up to the top, insert pictures and place in cell, and then this device, find your image, your logo, pop your logo in there. And when you pop your logo in there, whatever goes into here, I'm just going to type logo in for now. When you go to the new bill of quantities, your logo will appear here. So it is three parts wide by 2 parts high. So you can adjust your logo to fit in there with a white background if your logo isn't that ratio. Pop it in there and it will appear on your new bill of quantities. So that's the first thing you can set up. Second of all, you can set up the settings. So you've got your different cost categories that you can put up to 30 different cost categories. So these are, when you create yourself a cost price list, you can categorize each of these items, which means you can have different markup percentages for each of these different cost categories. So that's how you would break them down to cost categories. When you're breaking them down, either you can have them in a cost category that makes more sense to you, but ultimately you will be given the opportunity to override any of these cost categories with different markup percentages. So do bear that in mind when you're creating cost categories. The standard markup percentages, these are just options that are going to appear in a drop-down list. So I would suggest starting at your lowest standard markup and go up to the highest. Put in whatever you want there. You don't have to use all those spaces. This is just so people can select them later on. What's the acceptable percentage? Sorry, that should be percentage. I'll change it. What's the acceptable percentage out between the bill of quantities and the new the old bill of quantities and the new bill of quantities? Well, the thing is here, what this does is it calculates the costs based on your when we fill in all of your different included costs, it keeps the running cost of what you're saying you should be charging for those according to price list. But then later on, you're actually able to adjust your values in the final bill of quantities. And what that does is it measures the percentage gap between the two. And what that does is then so for example, if you say there mustn't be more than a 10%, and it goes beyond 10%, it flags up. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It just alerts you to the fact that there's a big difference. The other one is the lowest acceptable overall margin. So if you say, well, listen, on any job, the lowest margin we want to make is whatever, pop that in there, because then again, if the margin goes below that, it screams out at you. And the minimum advised rows, number of rows per bill of quantity code. What this means is, I'll show you in a few minutes, we're going to go through the different included costs and we're going to select the bill of quantity code that we receive from the customer, and you're going to assign different works and things to it. So what this is what's the minimum number of items that you're going to assign to each bill of quantity code. Again, it's not imperative. You'll see how it works later on. All it does is it just says to you, listen, this bill of quantity code, you haven't assigned anything to it, and it just reminds you in case you've forgotten to do that. So what I would do is when you start using the quote and you start seeing, okay, it's giving me alerts I don't really want, then you can come in and adjust this number. I'll show you again where that is. And this one here, which is these are just data inputs on your project setup where I've asked for various bits of information on your project setup. You may not require some of that. So for example, you may not want a travel distance or a travel time, or you may not require a site address or a pricing lead or a project code or whatever. Any of these that are left blank won't be required. Any of these that you want to insist that you or the staff or someone else fill in. So if you say, well, we need to always have a postcode, then tick the postcode. Then if the postcode isn't filled in, it will flag up in yellow and say, please fill in the postcode. So if these are all blank, then it just leaves all those on the project set up as optional fields. Once you set those two up, those are relatively easy. Then you've got your cost price. Now, this is the thing that drives all of this. And what I wanted to be able to do here was I wanted you to be able to, I think there are 5,000 rows here. Yeah. I wanted you to be able to set up a list of, in this case, 5,000 different products, services, materials, whatever it is that you supply, you'll be able to create an entire list. All I ask, all the spreadsheet requires that this product or service description is actually unique each time. So you could have some that include materials and labor, others that are just materials, some that are just labor, however you want to work it. But this will essentially be the list that it gives you to assign to your bill of quantities. Then you assign each one of these into a category, one of the categories that you've set up on the settings tab. You give it the unit. So for example, if you're charging per day or per square meter or per hour or per cubic meter or per month or whatever it is that you do, pop the unit in. And this is incredibly important. And I'll tell you why this is incredibly important. It's because I want later on, you're going to be able to look at it and go, well, if the customer wants, for example, 3 cubic meters of cement, what does that relate to in staff hours, for example? So it's going to tell you what you're costing in and what the bill of quantity requires so that you can make sure that the two match up, because you're not necessarily going to be costing in square meters against square meters. Sometimes you will, but sometimes you'll have to put, for example, time versus size or whatever the case might be. So the spreadsheet's going to very carefully show you what you're comparing with what, so you can make sure that you've got the right thing. So it's important to put the right unit in. And then this is the cost price per unit exclusive of VAT. So for example, here a day, that's £120 per day for that digger in equipment hire, etc. So you set this up with all of your prices and you're ready to go. That would be the stage that you would save this. These three tabs filled in, all ready to go, and you'll do save as, and this will be your template. So now when you get a bill of quantity from the customer, you'll start at this point with all of this being filled in already, ready to go. You can sort this. So we can sort this, for example, A to Z, or else if you really want to, you can sort by category to keep the categories together, however you want to work it. While we're on this page, there is one other thing I just want to show you. This is the text to use if unknown. This TBC. So I put in TBC, you can put in whatever text you want to use there. What this means is if you then type that text, if you type other text in here, it won't allow it. It flags up as red. But if you do put that TBC text in there, what that means is later on, when you're including the cost, which I'll show you, there's a column when you're including the cost to include, there's a unit price column over here. So you can override that unit price. But if you have a TBC, so let's go and have a look at that cost price. So for example, the contract drafting review service. If we selected the contract drafting review service, then it leaves that cell blank and it actually asks us for the price. So we then have to put the price in when we get to that. Alternatively, you can use this override column to override a price if you want to override a price. But if you don't, if you put in the TBC, then you need to fill that in because it'll ask you for that at the time of filling in the information. So put in a TBC there if you don't know what it is at the time of costing, and it needs to, at the time of doing the spreadsheet pricing, but you will need to fill it in later on when you get to the costing, when you're doing the included costs. Right, first what you do is you set up the project setup. So any of these fields that you need to fill in, you can fill in. It will be some of them, for example, if they're not compulsory, won't have an X next to it. So you don't need to fill it in. Others, for example, if you take out the project A, it will have a red cross. You need to fill it in if it's got the red cross in. So this will come from your settings tab, the compulsory, with which of these are compulsory. Fill that section in, and this will give you a list of sub cost categories. These will all be blank to start off with, but you can override the markup percentage. So if you select, for example, 30% here as a default, what that means is that it's going to give all of your products, all of these categories are just going to have a default 30% markup. If you then go, well, hold on, that's not right. So if you say, for example, fuel and mileage only want a 30%, I want only a 26% markup or whatever the case might be. So these markups here are the ones that you got in your drop-down list. I think you can override them completely. Yes, it does go blue because it says this isn't one of the pre-allocated percentage markups that you can do. But if you're happy with that, it's fine. It's more just an alert as it is to tell you that something's wrong. It's just to draw your attention to the fact that it's being done. All right, so once you fill this in, you are now ready to go to the bill of quantity data. Now, this one looks a little bit tricky, but bear with me, it'll make sense. I'm actually just going to clear this out there so I can show you how this works. When you get the bill of quantities from the customer, this is your client, this is going to vary slightly. So I've done an example here, but yours may look different. Essentially, what we're looking for is we're looking for the different rows of items, sometimes potentially subheaders or spaces within the rows. If we put the 0 in here, just for argument's sake, it'll trigger it and I'll show you. We want to get the header. We want to get the number, the data that's got the rows that got the data in. We'll ignore the headers in a few minutes, so you don't have to sit removing them. There is just one thing. If this data's got more than 15 columns, just delete some of the columns that you no longer need. But if it's got 15 or fewer columns, there'll be space. Copy that. Come to this spreadsheet and you want to paste the values into the gray row. You want to copy the headers, remember, and you want the headers in the gray row. Because at the moment, if I click on here, it doesn't give me any options to select the correct headers. If I go to the first cell and under number 1 in row 10 in the gray, right click, don't paste. So you don't want to do Control V, Control C, Control V kind of stuff. You just want to use right click, paste values, because that just pastes the data. It doesn't paste the formatting, which is important. Otherwise, you could lock all of these cells down. Paste values. Now you bring that data into this incorrect headers. It wants you to select the headers because it wants to know what's the item number, what's the description, what's the unit, and what's the quantity. So you just select and it'll give you the options. Now, what the customer's called item number is item number. What the customer's called description. The unit from your customer data is called unit, and quantity is this one here, quantity. They may have different names, obviously. You select the ones that match each one. Once you've got it, boom, it brings through the data. Now here it says part 1, subsection, unit, etc. Now we don't want that in there because we don't want to include those rows because they're not actually data rows, they're just headers. So what I've done is at the top here, I've said, what do we want to exclude? So because it says subsection, copy it once, paste values. Now anything with subsection, that column is ignored. You can also do it here. What did we have in there? We had unit in there. So if this, for example, said unit, and if it sees a unit text in this row, then it takes it out. You might not want to do that because you may have some of these which says a quantity 1 unit, so you may not want to remove that. So use as little as possible to tell it what to exclude. Make sure it's excluding the correct thing. You can also exclude 0. So if there is a quantity with a 0 and you tick that box, and if it's got a 0, it excludes it. But in this case, there aren't any, so we don't need to do that. Once you're done, if there are other rows that you want to ignore, you can use this column down here. Let's just say, for example, this thing needs to come out. You've said to the customer, I'm not going to be quoting on that particular item. You can ignore it. It'll bring it out of the bill of quantities, right? Once you're happy with what's here is in fact correct. The stuff in the gray here, it'll start off by looking the same. Later on, when you replace values on other sheets, it will change and give you the new values based on what you now have, rather than what you initially got from the customer. But that at the beginning won't show anything different. So you don't need to worry about that at the moment. Later on, that might become relevant to see where the changes are. But once you're ready and you go, yes, that's now the bill of quantity. If the data's been imported correctly, this is the data I want. What I wanted to do was to give you an option to then be able to add this data, edit the text, whatever you wanted to do, to give you ultimate flexibility rather than have it all locked down. One thing before we go to the next sheet is you'll see here where I've deliberately in the data. Where was the other data? There we go. I put A100 and A100 twice, so there's a duplicate. So what this one actually does now is it's the first one's A100, the second one is A100 with line number 2, and you'd see A103, etc. So it now gives it a new unique item number. And so if they've given you 5 of the same code, say for example A1, 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 it'll say A1 -1. It won't say -1. The first one will be A1, then A1-2, A1-3, A1-4, etc. So it'll give you these unique codes because we need unique codes going forward. So when you're ready with that and you go, yes, I'd like to bring that information into the spreadsheet, please. And you just simply come here and you select the green section. Make sure you start on row 11, select down to the bottom of the green, copy. And if you have gone all the way down to scroll down to select a whole bunch of rows, just click back up here again and press down so you know you're right back up at row number 11 again. Right click, paste values, not normal paste. Remember that paste formatting unlocks everything, paste values. And what that does now is it's now basically created you an editable list of what you've extracted from the bill of quantities. So this is now the bill of quantities that the client sent you, but in your format with these columns. And you can go and edit these should you want to. I'm assuming you probably wouldn't most of the time, but if you do need to, you've got flexibility to do that there. Just bear in mind that this then becomes your new kind of working data as it was, and your bill of quantities is effectively now kind of null and void. It's not really doing anything from the front page. So now what you want to do is you want to assign works to all of these descriptions. So then what you do is you click on the Include Costs tab. Now, this is the one where you're probably going to spend the most time entering all this data because there's a lot to do here. I'll show you what you do. Here's your bill of quantities item numbers, and each of those unique bill of quantities numbers that you've got are all listed here in what should be alphabetical order or in the order that they appear here. So you can come and sort them here into order or sort them by quantity or alphabetical order here in the description, however you want to do it. That will bring the bill of quantity items through here. Then, so you can select, for example, A100, and once that's selected, there's a little dot telling you this is the row that we've got. This is the description. So it tells you what the description is from the first sheet. Supply and pour high strength, obviously mix, etc. So you go, okay, well, in order to do that, we first and foremost need some concrete mix. So you select that. And now it says you're quoting for 1 cubic meter. You need 45 cubic meters for the project, but you're only quoting for 1 cubic meter here. So this is what you're doing as per the bill of quantities. So at the moment, what you're quoting is because your concrete mix strength is in cubic meters, you're comparing cubic meters with cubic meters, one against one. So that's fine. That's correct. If you look at that and go, that's what I should be quoting, that's correct. Then you do another again. Now you say, okay, now the concrete mix, but now hang on, what we also need is we need a site foreman. So you select site foreman. But now it says 1 day because the site foreman rate is per day. 1 day. So now you go, actually, to do 1 cubic meter of cement isn't 1 day. I don't know how much it's going to be. That's completely up to you. If you go, well, that's actually half a day, you've got a choice of using one of these 2 columns. You can either put the unit multiplier in. What the unit multiplier means is if you say, well, the ruling is for every 1 cubic meter, I do half a day, for example, then what you can do is you can put a multiplier of 0.5, and then it'll multiply it out. So if you know the maths of what it multiplies based on what you have, what you've got here and what it should be here, then just put the multiplier in here. Alternatively, if you can't be bothered to do the maths or you don't want to do the maths or you don't know what the exact number is, it's not an exact conversion, and you just go, well, I don't know what the multiplier is, but I know that to do 1 cubic meter is going to take him a day or a third of a day or whatever the case might be. If he says it's going to be a third of a day, then you can just put the 0.3 in here as a third of a day. Now, in this case, it's the same because it's the one and one, but you may have a situation where you might have, for example, miles to kilometers or those kind of things. So you may know what the multiplier is, you might know what the quantity is. Either way, you can just override it. So if you know that that 1 cubic meter is going to take half a day, then you just put in a zero point 0.5 here. And so on and so forth. You can keep going down the list. You can put as many of each of these in as you want to. If we did another one, and then we said, for example, we also need a digger, for example, and that was for 1 day. Where you go, no, that's also half a day for 1 cubic meter, whatever the case might be. You pop it in. Yeah, and remember this override price column. If you're looking at this unit price again, that unit price isn't correct, it's changed, whatever, you can put in an override price. Alternatively, that price, as I said, was a TBC. It'll ask you to fill in this column it'll turn yellow to say, please fill in this information for unit price. But I would imagine that most times you're just selecting and you're accepting that unit price is in the price list. You shouldn't have to fill this column in. If you have to fill it in, it turns yellow. Otherwise, it's optional if you want to override the unit price. And once you've then done all the ones for the A100, you can then move on to the next one, being the A100-2. And now it says reinforced steel mesh installation. So now you can go in and have a look and see what it is that you need. I don't know what we've got here. Let's just put the steel I-beam. I know that's a different thing. But if you were to say one of those, that's per meter, and we need 1 square meters. So say, for example, you know that 1 square meters is what we're doing. We're going to need, say, 5 meters of stuff of beam, then you put in there, for example, 5, and so on and so forth. You can go down the list. You can add as many of these in as you want to for each one. I've left you 10,000 rows. You can go nuts. And you can assign all the different elements to each of those bullet quantity codes. Once you've done that, I'm not going to do them all now because it'll take me forever to do the demo video, but let's just say you've done that. When you go back to the dashboard, there are no prices in here yet because we haven't actually kind of selected that we want to move forward with this yet. But if you look down the right-hand side, it actually tells you how many entries you've done of each of these bullet quantities. Now, they come off the list. That's what that setting I was talking about. So if I've said the minimum of 5 is 2, if I said, for example, 5, when you go back to the dashboard, you'll see the 3 and the 1 are both on there now. But 3 and the 1 are both on there because you haven't got as many as 5. The ones that you've got some are in yellow, and the ones that you've got none are in red. So obviously these ones would very strongly indicate that you haven't actually costed these BoQ codes. Now, if, for example, there's a reason why you're not costing anything because there's a null quantity, a null, you're not actually going to quote whatever, you can potentially ignore this, but you've got to be there with extreme caution because it means that you haven't actually costed for that and you haven't quoted for that. So this is just to remind you, if you say that you should have 5 rows of each and you've got 5 rows of each, at least 5 rows, some of them you've got 6, some of them you've got 10 rows, whatever the case might be, then when you come to this dashboard, this should be clear. Now, if you've got a whole bunch and this table fills up, you can come up here and you can select. At the moment, it only goes to table 1 because there is no table 2. But if there was a second table, you have 2, 3, 4. You can toggle between the tables. Just make sure to come back to table 1 to check that there aren't any zeros on once you've finished. But this should, in theory, be either cleared or all yellows, and you should be able to look through the yellow ones that have got few rows and go, yes, that's right. That's all that needs to be costed as a check to make sure that you've actually costed everything. Because this here will allow you to continue if you carry on. But if you just ignore these red ones, it'll allow you to continue because I don't want to limit the spreadsheet. But just bear in mind, you might have not costed stuff. So you need to keep an eye on that. Once you're ready and you go, that's fine, I've got everything done. Then as a final kind of stage, what you do is you go to your new bullet quantities, you select the green batch again, copy, right click, paste values, and that now gives you all the new item codes, all the new, the original descriptions that the supplier, that the customer sent on their descriptions, or alternatively, what you've changed them to here. And then that will give you the description, it'll give you the unit, it'll give you the quantity that they've asked for, and it'll give you the rate that you are going to be charging them per unit. It then multiplies them out for each of those different line prices, and it tracks the cost that you've assigned to each of those items. So now when we go back to the dashboard, we can see that there's a quote, cost, estimated margin, markup, margin. So now this is coming from the new BoQ stuff that you've entered here. But now, because this is editable, you may want to go in and you may say, for example, well, hold on, we don't need £409.50. We can just round things off here and we can adjust things. So if you go to the dashboard and you see that there is 23.1% margin, if you come back to that new B&Q and you say, well, let's make that 400 and let's make this 290, for example, it changes the line price. And when you go back to the dashboard, you can see that margin now, these values have now decreased. The cost stays the same, but your quote just adjusts accordingly. So you can edit this new BoQ, and then you can then just go back to your dashboard, one final run. It checks if the margin is acceptable. It says, yes, the margin is acceptable. If you do adjust it way too much, let's go to your BoQ. Let's put this down to 200. And then you go to the dashboard. It says that you're still making a profit, but here it says that your margin's too low. And it also says the new BOQ is 18.8% out, which is more than what you said in the settings of 5%. So you can change this to 18, whatever percentage there. As I said before, these alerts, I mean, the margin too low obviously is a problem, but these other alerts that aren't the bold red and these ones over here, they might be fine. If you look at it and go, I understand what that's doing, I understand why it's doing it, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But the bold red ones like this, I mean, the margin too low, that's usually a big problem unless you're familiar with that on the project. In which case, if you do just want to clear that for your own peace of mind, you can come here and adjust the margin if you want to do so. But do come back here and just have a run through here, make sure these figures are correct and everything before you actually submit any quote. But once you've done, then you can come here and you can say File, save a copy, and save it as you can change it here to a PDF. And if I just save that onto the desktop, and then you see it'll open that up as a PDF. It's probably going to have a whole bunch of rows. It's probably going to be quite a large PDF because there's a whole bunch of blank spaces and 8 pages and pages and pages of blank. So what I would suggest doing, rather instead of actually saying save as a PDF, is go to print and print to PDF. And then you can select just page 1 and you can print this off as a PDF. And that is then your new bill of quantities. Alternatively, you can copy this and you can paste that data into another spreadsheet and you can put up the headers and whatever you need to do. You can do that too if you want to. But this gives you then your editable dynamic BoQ estimator. That gives you your final bill of quantities that you can then submit back to the client with the data in that they've got tech, units, quantities, rates, etc. And as I said, you can override these, but if you do override them, just go back to the dashboard and then check this out. And again, make sure what you've got is correct. So as you go along kind of thing, once you're in the project setup, once you've done this and transferred the data across, then that becomes null and void. Once you've got this and you then add your included cost, then it combines these two to create the new bill of quantities. And once you paste it in here, this then becomes the document that you're really working with. It does still take your costs because you're not putting in your costs here. It does still take your costs from these included costs. So even if you adjust these rates that you're charging, it keeps your costs the same. So you still want to make sure that you've got these included costs in. If you, for example, left out these included costs, and then when you got to the bill of quantity, put in a price for them, then what that's going to do is it's going to take that as a null cost, but with that rate, and it's going to show you an inflated margin. Now, if you do have a null cost, that's fine. But if you don't have a null cost, it's going to show an inflated margin. So you want to make sure this included cost is as accurate as possible. And then simply just adjust these based on some final adjustments. You don't really want to add stuff in here that you haven't got costs on because that's going to then give you an inflated margin. So bear that in mind, see how that works for you. As I said, it's quite a complex process, but I've tried to make it as robust and user-friendly and adaptable as possible. If you're looking at this game, this is something I want to do, but I want to do it differently. Do get in touch for a custom version. If you're looking at this game, wow, this does exactly what I want, and this is going to work for you, then yeah, as usual, I wish you all the best with the spreadsheets, and yeah, let me know if you need anything else. Thank you very much, and goodbye.